InvestorIdeas.com podcast.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcast. In today's podcast, I interview Jason Malcolm, the co-lead of the Archview management consulting team, where we discuss some of the recent expectations surrounding legalization in the U.S., current cannabis market trends, as well as Jason's role with Archview in the tri-state area. So today I'm talking with Jason Malcolm, who is the co-lead on the Archview management consulting team. Jason, it's great to be able to talk to you. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, since you just recently joined Archview in January, maybe your background in the industry and then your role that you're going to be having at Archview with the Archview management consulting team?
Yes. So I spent the last 15 plus years in the financial services industry, specifically in consulting, helping regional banks as well as global banks set up their risk programs, look at cost takeout strategies and technology rationalization strategies to help them operate more efficiently overall as an organization. I recently got into the cannabis industry for many reasons. First and foremost is the passion for the product itself, the benefits it has on people that consume cannabis, either for medical or adult use. But also, the emerging market and the opportunity that the cannabis industry currently has for itself. A lot of the skills that I've learned in financial services, especially within risk, as well as other areas of the organization, could easily be applied to cannabis consulting. So I'm working with a group of very smart people and talented people that have been in the cannabis industry for quite some time. And we are working together and collaborating together to bring me up to speed on certain trends and certain aspects in the market itself. But it's a unbelievable and thrilling ride thus far.
So right now, would you say that you're more going to be focusing on working with companies who are coming to market, or are you more aiding companies that are already existing to try to have them maybe move into different states or into different areas of the cannabis industry?
So it's both. So we focus a lot on some of the startups that are either seeking capital or they have the capital itself and they already know the business plan. They're very clear on their objectives. And their aspirations that they want to succeed to. So, we help them either go to market in specific interests of specific markets of interest, whether it be Northeast, whether it be the West Coast, or whether it be the Great Lakes region. And then we help, existing cannabis companies to scale or to grow their business. And that could be either through mergers and acquisitions. That could be either through branding and archetyping or consumer surveys, risk assessments, or just applying for additional licenses for their business. So, it's a slew of services that we actually offer. That will always be our bread and butter and our backbone, is to help existing cannabis companies as well as startup companies.
So I've definitely talked about this with different people in the past, but I guess when we're looking at the market today versus, over the last couple of years, what are the biggest things that you're seeing sort of need to be addressed when you're looking at an existing company that's looking at expanding in today's market? Post-COVID, you have a lot of different changes that have happened to the cannabis industry over the last year. You've had a lot more focus on delivery, a lot more focus on even how your store is built is going to be a very different prospect now if you're looking at retail, even production. A lot of new considerations need to be addressed, and obviously new markets opening up. What are you seeing as some of the main focuses companies need to address today?
That's a loaded question. There's a lot of
points
to touch on that one.
You don't need to dive too deep into it because I know that could take a while. But I guess even looking at yourself, you're from New Jersey. In that market specifically, when you're looking at that sort of East Coast area, what are the biggest considerations companies are having to look at to expand and to not be burdened by potential lockdowns or potential whatever circumstances that could hit them?
Yeah. So I think, we have to understand and we have to still keep in mind that cannabis is still federally illegal. So every state operates very different than the other. California operates very differently than Colorado and Massachusetts, et cetera, et cetera. So, the biggest, I think, one of the biggest challenges are really twofold. One, access to capital, right? Because since it's federally illegal, it's difficult to have the relationships with certain financial organizations. That doesn't mean that you can have a relationship with a financial organization, but it just makes it a little bit difficult and a little bit more expensive. And then the second aspect is regulation, and so regulation, taxation, enforcement. That could be a challenge in terms of being very overwhelming for that business owner. So depending on the state, depending on their tax programs, and depending on how they roll out enforcement, that can really, make a difference for a small business owner, and even in some cases a medium-sized business owner to operate or to engage themselves within that state. So, I'm hoping that New Jersey and the other Northeast states are really friendly from a regulatory and tax perspective to the cannabis business owners.
That's good to hear. One of the things you kind of briefly touched on there, obviously, is federal legalization and federal regulations in the U.S. There's a lot of speculation about what could be changing over the next couple of years. I see a lot of hype in the industry talking about safe banking, which would give access to capital in a very different way. How are you best or how would Archview best advise an existing company to prepare for those eventualities? Because obviously there's going to be things you need to do in the near term and things you need to plan for in the long term that are very different from each other, because you'll need to plan your business route in a different way, knowing that there's going to be access to huge capital markets within the next 2 years, that there is going to be potential for even the States Act or the MORE Act, which again could open up a lot more potential abilities for a cannabis business.
Yes. So great question, because, we just launched a federal readiness campaign, which is one of our 4 pillars within Archview Management Consulting, that focuses just specifically on what you just mentioned, right? What happens to a specific company when the Fed flips the switch and is completely legal, right, nationwide? And in some cases, some companies might be really well positioned from an infrastructure perspective, or just a business model perspective, to be well positioned for that federal legalization change. Some other companies may not be, and they might face a lot of threats in their environment that they're not prepared for. So we want to be able to have those conversations, open that dialogue, and come to the table with those companies and really try to understand what they currently do today, how well they do it, and what would they look like tomorrow if the Fed was to legalize cannabis nationwide? And that's really going to be, us putting together a SWOT analysis for those companies and really digging into the details of how they're set up currently and how they need to look like tomorrow. And in some cases, if they don't, if they're not going to be in a position that's going to be an advantage to them, then what are some of their options post legalization, right? What are some of the options they can explore or entertain down the road? And we can also help with that conversation as well.
So what are some of the biggest, I guess, hypothetical risks that, for instance, like a multi-state operator is looking at with legalization? Are there any? Is that purely beneficial to them? Because I have heard a lot of, dissenting argument about if federal legalization is beneficial to a large-scale multi-state operator that's built up their company and navigated those different state barriers, that maybe federal legalization isn't helpful to them or could actually hamper their business in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know the answer to that question until we see how the Fed actually
how it all plays out. Yeah,
right. Because everything's a guessing game, and even with these new states, I mean, like I said before, they operate so differently from each other, and they all have very different focuses, right? So, for example, New Jersey really I hate to really say it like that, because Massachusetts was probably the biggest state that came into play for the East Coast, right? To say that we're allowing, adult and medical use within our state, which was fantastic. But New Jersey is a pretty big player. And, now New York is talking about it. And Connecticut is now talking about it as well. And they're trying to lay out some really fantastic social equity programs within their state that they want to, explore further, entertain, and write into their bill. And then Rhode Island itself. So, you're really seeing a domino effect across the entire Northeast state. And, every state is going to operate differently. And even when the Fed, comes out and says we're legalizing cannabis nationwide, they still might leave it to the state to operate, independently in their own rules and regulations. So they may not change anything, and they might just say, we're going to apply a federal tax, on all cannabis sales, but we're not going to, introduce these very cumbersome, laws and regulations around regulating cannabis nationwide. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And if it does play out that way, where it's still independent from the state perspective, then the MSOs for the multi-state operators, and to your question earlier, they should be, business as usual. But we'll see.
What is the kind of current speculation you're seeing from the businesses you've worked with and people in the industry when it comes to how some sort of rescheduling? I've heard a lot more talk about rescheduling than I have about actual legalization. That seems to be that there'll be a descheduling of cannabis and then allowing the states to kind of continue to do their own thing. And then maybe, again, the Safe Banking Act. What's kind of your consensus you've heard so far?
There's been okay. So the good news is that, this past election, the Democrats have won the majority in the Senate, the majority in Congress, and then, of course, the White House. So we are assuming in the cannabis world that that's going to really just kind of accelerate the process towards federal legalizing cannabis. And then you have Biden, who has kind of changed his tone a little bit around his thoughts and his perspective on legalizing cannabis. And I think at one point he wasn't really for it, and now more recently he's been more for a rescheduling of cannabis, like you said before, to a Schedule 2, which provides a lot of complexities if we were to reschedule versus deschedule. Simply because the way everything is set up, right? And you have VP Harris, who takes a little bit more of a progressive stance on federal legalization. And she wants to deschedule it completely, which would be obviously very beneficial for the industry itself. It'll be much easier to transition. And she's behind the MORE Act and everything else. So, I'm hoping that she kind of plays, the role that Biden played to Obama years ago around same-sex marriage and everything else, where Biden was really for it, not more so than Obama. I shouldn't really say that, but I guess it was on his agenda, right? A little bit more than Obama's side. Right, exactly. And Obama was, obviously he had a lot going on when he came into office with the, financial mess and everything else. So a lot of things weren't really on his plate, but I'm hoping Harris does take that role. And she kind of has his ear. Obviously, she's the VP, and she, they vote for a descheduling. I think that would just make it so much easier for the current operators within each one of these states to continue business. Whereas the rescheduling would kind of be halting everything at the moment till everyone gets their arms around what is exactly happening, what's going to change, et cetera, et cetera.
So I guess the other thing I'd like to talk about a little bit more is more the investor side, specifically banking coming into play. That seems pretty damn likely within the next year to two. That the Safe Banking Act has been in discussion for quite some time. And I know that there's a lot more momentum behind that, and that's kind of a win for every party, whether you're, either side. Money is good, is kind of the usual, usual consensus that people seem to have. So how, and especially right now, you're starting to see a lot of hype and momentum around cannabis again, because they just came off a good year. A lot of these businesses, it being deemed essential was a huge social step for cannabis that put it in a lot of people's brains. How do you best advise companies to navigate sort of the investment landscape when it comes to access to capital now and how to plan for this massive wave of capital that is going to be flooding into the market once that Safe Banking Act was passed. Because I mean, there's in the U.S. there's a lot of companies then that can go public or have different abilities or a lot more public access to funds that isn't there right now.
Well, I think obviously, like you said, 2020 was a fantastic year for the cannabis industry, right? Being an essential business and amongst other things, just the from a medical perspective, the mental health side of things, right? Yeah. To being locked in your house, for 8 months or however many months people, stayed in their homes and didn't want to venture outside in fear of COVID. I myself wound up getting a post-COVID puppy, so I needed some company around the apartment as well. But it's definitely gotten a lot of traction lately. And that brings some new interesting possibilities into the market. You look at today, Tilray stock price, for example, from December until, a couple of days ago was $70. Now that $70 mark was, a lot of it was fueled by a Reddit, postings.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's a little, but it's still it was a healthy increase from December of like $8 and $9 to January around there to like $22 or $21. That is an unbelievable increase. And that's all around speculation of the wave of legalization coming in cannabis in the United States. That type of news and that type of gain really perks everyone's eyes and ears up, right? Or everyone's ears up, I should say, at the bigger companies. Maybe some of the CPG brands or the beverage companies, right? Because they're going to say there's a lot of money to be made within cannabis. Yep. And right now their hands are tied because it's federally illegal. They really can't step in the business right now. But there are smaller investors that could come in, invest their money, and grow that business to a point that when it does become legal nationwide, you're going to see a lot of these big companies, especially tobacco and alcohol companies, come in and buy all these smaller companies. And you're going to see a lot of merger and acquisitions, more so than today, which is quite a bit. Yeah. You're going to see a lot of M&A activity within cannabis when that happens. And it's a perfect play because a lot of these big companies don't have to start from scratch. It's much easier to buy and to acquire and grow that way than it is to start from the bottom.
Yeah, you definitely touched on something I wanted to bring up as well, which is obviously you've seen it with GameStop. Now you're starting to see it with cannabis and psychedelic stocks. But it's an interesting thing where you're seeing the power of the retail investor versus institutional investors, and in an age where you're starting to see as well lots of a younger generation have access to funds through esports, through online companies, through making an app, whatever. It does start to raise the question of, how does someone navigate that landscape of the retail, like meme investor and institutional investors and sort of appeasing both crowds or taking advantage of this situation. I know I talked to one company recently who said, I kind of like this, that they are focusing on the cannabis industry because it does mean a little extra dollar in your bank sometimes, and it gives access to funding and maybe expansion for these companies that they might not normally have had with traditional institutional investors.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think like GameStop sprint, I've never seen that before.
It was pretty historic, for a pretty crazy thing to just.
Exactly. I mean, it's, GameStop, years ago, GameStop was, and not to get off topic, but just to kind of touch upon it, that was a great business model years ago before the digital era, right? And now you have the digital space where you don't even need discs anymore to play your games, and you could buy everything on the online stores. It's just like the music industry, kind of converted in a similar fashion, right? But in terms of investing, your question is more investing within cannabis stocks and how the retail. Yeah. So
Well, now that you're seeing as well that those same Reddit subreddit forums are also they're looking at cannabis, and a lot of them, especially if you're into that sort of anarchist momentum, cannabis is pretty good. Like you're not against it. You're not going to be against cannabis and psychedelic stocks succeeding. That's kind of what you'd prefer, is that those companies make more money and become more dominant players.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, from a retail investor side, it's all about really doing your homework and feeling comfortable and believing in the product itself. I have friends that don't buy ExxonMobil and Chevron because they have the whole ESG hats on, which is completely okay and totally fine. But in the cannabis world, it's really hard. It's for someone that is not a mature investor. It's extremely hard for them to really read out, understand who's pulling the strings and who's really pumping up the stock price to the point where it's completely unhealthy and someone's going to wind up shorting the stock and watching the stock completely drop and fall. So in that case, it's a very difficult question for me to answer. I think it's more going to be on an investment side of it, an investment financial investor or planner to actually touch upon that. But I think cannabis stocks, the way I look at cannabis today, and maybe this will help in terms of your question. The way I look at cannabis today is the alcohol industry of the 20s, the Prohibition era. That's where we are in. We are in that space. We are. They're about to lift that prohibition, regulations on cannabis, and there's going to be a lot of interesting big players in the market going forward once that happens. There's already a big players interested in the industry today. Yeah. So you could just see that catapulting and going forward. And it's not going to stop with the United States. The United States is not going to be the last country on the planet to legalize cannabis. There's going to be more, right? Canada was, in our side of the world, Canada was, the first one. Their share of border with us. Hopefully we're the second, and hopefully Mexico will become the third. And we really see this whole, and EU is actually starting to loosen up some policies around CBD and stuff like that. So we really hope that this becomes more of a universal acceptance, just like tobacco and alcohol is today. Obviously, restrictions, regulations need to happen, and people need to adhere to them. But we hope investors actually see that going forward. And cannabis has it's organic, it's natural, it's I don't want to say healthy because that's probably not going to be the right word to use, but there's less.
It's healthier than most of the things people.
It's healthier than the most of the things that we're talking about, exactly. And I don't want to say too many names. I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but yeah,
even comparing it to sugar and coffee, it does pretty well.
That's exactly right. And the studies have shown that there hasn't been overdoses on cannabis from smoking, right? That hasn't been reported yet. And obviously alcohol and tobacco and everything else that has a lot of fatality. So I'm hoping that people do see that side of cannabis and they see the investment opportunity within cannabis. And one of the biggest demographics of users of cannabis is millennials, and they really, millennials really get the ESG movement and environmental, social, and governance, and they really understand that, and they've witnessed and seen over the course of time the financial crisis of 2008, as well as some massive natural disasters in Australia, wildfires, and the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf, and they understand the importance of ESG and the importance of natural ingredients versus artificial and everything else. So I'm hoping they see that opportunity.
Speaking of ESG then specifically, and also the globalization of this industry, and kind of my question would be, when again you're sort of consulting and advising with these companies, how much of a focus do you put on, while they're looking at both being environmental in their own country, thinking on a global scale. Eventually, you could be selling your products to an international market. Is that something you consider sort of right out of the gate, or is that like, trying to leap before you can walk type of thing, or that type of deal?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a really interesting question, because I was just talking about this the other day. I mean, there's some states, some counties within certain states that still have dry Sundays, right? So the alcohol industry is kind of still evolving, if you want to think of it that way,
Yeah.
in certain aspects, right? In certain areas of the country. And this is going on for what, 70, 80, 90 years, right? A long time. So the short answer to the question is no, it's not going to happen overnight. I think it's going to take time. And those are some of the questions that we have when legalization does happen in the states, is what would the interstate commerce look like between these states, right?
Yeah.
Are they allowed to sell to one another, import, export, and that goes for other countries as well. So what happens to that from a state by state perspective? And I think some of that will be ironed out in the very beginning, and some of it I think will take time. And the question is, what would the government propose for day one?
Yeah. So as well, I mean, what would your speculation be on when and if, kind of, it seems like a when there will be some sort of change in the US, but I don't know if it'll be full legalization, as ideally as everyone wants. But let's say that happens. What do you think would be the next areas to go kind of fully in? Obviously, there's lots of talks about Mexico. Is that kind of the main next big market, or are you more focused on the EU? Or even there's some talk of like some big potential, at least already you're seeing it with CBD in Southeast Asia. And that could be the real gold mine.
Yeah. So, for the first part of your question is so something needs to happen in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Historically, if one party has control of all three houses, midterm elections, they wind up losing a couple of seats here and there, and they might lose the majority in one of the houses, whether it's the Senate or the Congress. So something needs to happen over the next couple of years. And the question is, to your point, is that legalization nationwide, or is it something that's really important for the industry to be sustainable and grow, or is it really nothing? And if nothing happens, it will be such a disappointment, because it's really like the trifecta. It's everything is in place. Everything is in a perfect situation for something big to happen. So if it's not federal legalization, then I'm hoping it's something around the SAFE Act and getting people access, or getting these business owners access to capital, and at least in a cost efficient way, and obviously to funds and loans. So if it's not federal legalization, at least I hope it's access to capital in the SAFE Act for sure. Mexico is making some pretty big movements in the medical market. They're setting up regulations around medical use of cannabis. And from what I understand and from what I hear, that is kind of, nudging its way into the adult use market in Mexico. And if you're able to access a license and have a medical licensed business, then it's going to be much easier for you to transition into adult use in Mexico. And that market most likely is going to be, very, very big, possibly bigger than United States.
I guess, is there any sort of fear in the industry that the government will not move fast enough in the US and just putter around for too long, that eventually other countries will legalize a little bit faster, and you'll start having such large scale international cannabis conglomerates that, the US won't be able to catch up. And then when you do legalize, it's just going to be a buy-up fest, that, all these companies are going to be absorbed quickly, and you might not be able to be as international of a player because of, delays of 2 years. If one company is a year ahead of you, that gives them an extra year to figure shit out, get more capital, and et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything. around the fear of us.
Because obviously, yeah, the U.S. has its own local big market. Like
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
fine there.
California is, a tremendous market.
Yeah.
It's the biggest in the country. I even believe it's bigger than Canada.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's
More people
huge.
there.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a massive market. You know, I, like I said, I haven't really heard any buzz around that per se. I know that people think that Mexico is going to be a bigger market than the United States, for example. But I haven't really heard of the fear of the United States dragging their feet so much they'll be left behind. I think they have a chance. Colorado changed cannabis completely. Like that was right. That became such a sophisticated market. And that really changed how cannabis was viewed and perceived by a large, the larger public opinion, right? I think that the United States definitely has a big role and a big hand to play here, and I hope they execute it in a timely manner. But the fact that they may be left behind, I don't know if it's left behind. I think they can miss out on opportunities if they don't act faster.
I guess that's as far as it would get. Like I said, the U.S. has a big enough domestic market to maintain. I think there's enough cannabis sales there. Quite obviously, the last year has shown that there's enough money to be made. But
I mean, Illinois has been booming, killing it, and I'm really eager to see. New Jersey, when that happens, I think later this year they're going to start to open dispensaries for adult use, which will be really interesting to see. For me, northern New Jersey, driving on Route 17 and Route 4 to see a dispensary, it'd just be mind blowing, and then New York, I think, is going to follow shortly after. New York is really they got hit hard by COVID. I go into Manhattan seldomly, drive through, and I've never seen it so empty, even now. So they got hit really hard. So, I think they'll be next, and then obviously, when I said Connecticut or Rhode Island, I mean, I want to see like the PA, Massachusetts already there, but PA, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. I'm so interested to see what that market's going to look like, that Northeast market, right? And how it's going to rival to some other states. I mean, that's just going to be really interesting to see. And it's going to be really interesting to see how these states set up their regulations, because Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, the tri-state, quote unquote, right? They could easily lose out on revenue opportunity if they're too harsh on their regulations and taxations versus the other. So it'll be really interesting to see how they collaborate, if they do, with their guidelines and their laws around this. So it'll be really interesting to see that.
I guess in final thoughts, what kind of are your expectations for New Jersey specifically, with more rollouts and sort of expansion of cannabis? How do you see that, and I guess how does it compare to some other states? Is there a lot of beneficial things that you're seeing right now, or is there a lot of stuff that seems like it could be hampering themselves?
I haven't seen anything so far that could be hampering themselves. I'm happy to see, and I want to know more about this. I'm happy to see they did propose a 5% social equity tax within the state, which is fantastic. And I also know that they do want to add support for the hardest hit neighborhoods and communities on the drug war, to help people, stand up their businesses and create jobs and, all the good things that really should be happening. But I haven't really seen anything that's really been, kind of thrown me off guard or too alarming.
As far as licenses being granted and how you're seeing that, is it looking like it's going to be more limited or a little bit more aggressive maybe than some other states with onboarding their programs?
I don't know too much about the licensing stats to comment on that. That's something I'm still learning as well. We have, there are some states like Illinois that's very protective of the amount of licenses they give out. It's a very connected state. I don't think Jersey is going to be so restrictive in that sense, but I will think they will protect some of the licensees in terms of not oversaturating the market where it just doesn't become that profitable, for lack of a better term, for some of these business owners to dive into this unknown market. So I don't think it's going to be to the extreme, but not, it's going to be right in the middle, hopefully.
Yeah, ideally, right? That's definitely,
ideally,
you would hope that also any state coming on board now would know.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut get in a room and hash this stuff out, right? Make it so that it's neutral between all three states, and each state is not going to have a problem with consumers bleeding over to other states and vice versa. They're going to all be able to. They're not going to miss out on the revenue opportunities. That's the thing. That's where you want to, from a state perspective, you want to be able to create an environment and create a program that's going to be sustainable over time to generate revenue. And those revenue dollars could go to a number of different programs, social programs in the state, or could fix the potholes in New Jersey for me. I mean, I would love that. So infrastructure programs, social programs, I mean, that's something that if I was running a state, I would want to be my primary focus is safe policies, not aggressive, neutral, and collaborate with your neighbors to make sure that you don't lose out on the bucks.
Yeah, well, that would be, like I said, very ideal. And at this point, like I said, you would hope most states would look at other states as examples and, be like, how do we figure this out better than everyone? Because we have so many previous examples to go off of. Let's get the best results for us, right?
Yeah, and we talk to people within these states about lessons learned from other states, right? We have on our team people that have been in the cannabis industry for 8 to 10, 12 years, and they have been around when these states have flipped over to the medical and adult use markets, and they know some of the things that they have done right and some of the things they have done wrong. And we do talk to certain people within these state roles to kind of educate them and advise them on what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. And even our clients they have ideas and they want to go to market, but they're not sure which state to go to market in because of regulatory concerns. We provide that financial analysis, we provide that data for them, and we provide them with the approach and the recommendations that best suit their business idea and their business model. And in certain cases, we have, we look at to our neighbors to the north and Health Canada and see if that actually works for some of our clients, right? So it really depends, and we really have the data, the insight, and the experience on Archview Management Consulting to really drive home those recommendations and really have a nice fit for our clients to operate in.
Yeah, well, I definitely anticipate you guys will have a very busy next couple of years with more and more states opening up and more licenses. And like I said, regulations changing. It's going to be a really even more exciting than the last couple of years, if you will. Now that you're starting to see the proof in the pudding of this industry. It's nice to have it sort of been validated within the last year or so of seeing like this is real. It's not going away. And there's a lot of potential in these businesses.
And you have, the states of Colorado and Washington and all the, the guys that really were there in the very beginning to provide the business case, right? And that really changed the perception of consumers. It changed the perception of regular folks that really had a negative view of cannabis in the past, and lawmakers, most importantly, right? Because they're the ones that puts the law in place. And 68% of Americans, according to a Gallup poll, is now in favor of legalizing cannabis, right? That number is going to increase year after year. And to your point, if we're so busy over the next couple of years and, we can't keep a head over water, it's a great problem to have, and I welcome it for sure. And there's no doubt in my mind that we'll get there and we will be there. But it's really exciting. It's really an exciting time to be involved in this industry. And someone that's looking to go into a new industry like I did, that's interesting, emerging, and a lot of opportunity. It's perfect spot.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for talking today, Jason. You gave a lot of great insight on sort of market trends and what's going on, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate meeting you as well.
Once again, that was Jason Malcolm, the co-lead of Archview Management Consulting. To find out more about Archview Management Consulting, you can click the link attached in the article or visit their website at archviewmanagementconsulting.com. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated's CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.